Hi everyone, welcome to the Dracarys Magicka Support guide. This video will take you over the various types of Magicka Support, as well as gear sets, class preferences, and general tips. More detailed class-specific videos will follow. In general, there are two ways you can play support. This will depend greatly on what group composition you have, as well as how many supports you run. These can be classed roughly as either offensive or defensive playstyles of support. Different classes excel at either offensive or defensive. For example, Sorks can do both, whereas Wardens are more defensive and DK is more offensive. Nightblades and Templars are generally better at defensive or healing style support. Looking into the main abilities from each class which will help with the support role, you have the following. For Sorks, that's Negate, Streak, Root and Lightning Flood, as well as all the other general support skills. Whereas Warden have Permafrost, the Armor buff, Mushrooms regen buff, and Nature's Embrace. DKs for the offensive side have Banner, Talons, and also Molten Weapons, which can help out your healers. Nightblade and Templar both bring various skills, but generally they are more healing oriented, although Nightblade can help out with Fear. These class abilities go along with the more general support abilities such as Siege Shield, Purge, and Energy Orb. Here are some suggested bar setups for Sork, Warden, and DK. You can see that the class abilities are combined with these other support abilities and some defensive abilities to assist with the general support role. Obviously the bar positionings can change based on your specific role in the raid, but this is just an example. Okay, on to sets. I would class the sets as defensive, offensive, general, and the monster helms. Defensive includes Sanctuary, Ebon, and Jorvalds. Sanctuary is a really good set which overall increases the healing of your raid. The 2 to 4 set bonuses aren't that great in comparison to others for other roles such as healers, which is why it's a really good set to use on supports, because other stats than regen aren't really that important. Ebon buffs your group's overall health. This can be really useful to assist those who struggle to reach the health cap, or to increase your health further to provide you more time to react to situations such as being negated, under siege, bombed, that sort of thing. Jorvalds increases the duration of all buffs that you place on the group, so this is especially helpful for Warden supports. Moving on to the offensive sets, you have Worm, Meritorious, and Wizard Riposte. These sets are classed as offensive because they have a spell damage bonus. This bonus will assist anyone who's playing a slightly more damaging or healing support role, such as a DK, to do slightly more while still providing a support buff. General sets are sets which assist you to perform your role. These sets are Lich, Seducer, Willows, and Alteration Mastery. These general sets are aimed at boosting your regen to allow you to perform your role easier. Of course, if you don't have these sets, you could use a skill such as Spell Symmetry, which is still useful for a general setup, but these sets help you to stay focused on your main role rather than having to constantly spell sim. The one beneficial thing about Lich in particular is that you only need it on one bar. For the monster helms, you have Bloodspawn, Earthgore, Lord Warden, or a double regen or House setup. Bloodspawn obviously helps you gain ulti quicker, it helps you become a bit more tanky, which is sometimes useful for more offensive styles. You have Earthgore, which heals your raid for a lot, it can proc in really dangerous situations. Lord Warden is a general damage mitigation buff, it can be really useful if you're inside keeps. And then of course you have the double regen or regen House setup, which just generally increases your stats to assist you to perform your role. Looking on to the next patch, you have the Black Rose Prison healing staff. I think this will be really helpful as well because it will mean that whenever you cast Healing Ward on someone, they'll receive extra healing from everyone. As for gear traits, everything should be an impen. As a support, you're one of the squishiest members of the raid. You don't have high shields due to your low stat pool, and you generally don't have very many defenses or heals for yourself, so therefore you need the impen to help keep you alive. As for ring traits, it's sort of up to your raid. You can either run Infused, Arcane, Swift, or Harmony. All of them perform well, but it's up to you. Many groups have health requirements. As with all builds, the best way to reach this if you're short of health after your base gear stats are taken into account, is to use tri-stat glyphs. Then, after you've applied the tri-stat glyphs, adjust your attributes to account for any other missing health. This is because tri-stat glyphs gives you effectively free secondary stats, so as a Magicka user this means that you get free stamina which you wouldn't normally have just by using the tri-stat glyphs. The second really important attribute is regen. This is a crucial stat for this type of build. Each class plays a little differently and have class-specific ways of regenning Magicka, but a good goal to reach is around 3k or more regen. As for race, I really recommend Argonian, especially in raids where you don't have many Master Staffs or on non-CP. Other good races include High Elf or Breton. You can of course play with any race, but these are the preferred ones. In terms of Mundus, you generally want the Atronach, although sometimes the Mage can also be important, especially for a class like Sorks where it's kind of dependent on Magicka level for its shields. That changes a little next patch, although in general I would always prioritize regen over maxed Magicka. Class-specific CP will be covered in future videos, but in general you want to focus on high defenses, regen, and healing. When organising what gear sets to use and how to combine them, you need to consider whether you want to use light or heavy armour. So obviously the benefits of light are that you have more regen, more cost reduction. You also get spell penetration and crit, which could be important if you're an offensive support set, and also you can choose pretty much any support set in the game. For heavy, it's much more defensive, it has a lot higher stam sustain, and you also get a higher max stat pool because of the extra health that the heavy gives you in combination with not having to put as many points into health. The downside of heavy obviously is that you don't have as much recovery or reduced cost, so if I was to use a heavy set, I'd normally always combine that with something like Lich to make up for what I'm losing by using heavy. Here are some examples of different support set combinations. You see that you can either use double support set or support set plus one general set. It's also important to note that some of the sets you only need to have active on one bar, for example Meritorious or Jorvalds or Lich. All of these can be used only on the bar to which they most apply. For example, Jorvalds on the bar which you're applying the buffs with, Meritorious on the bar that you're purging with, and Lich generally on one bar. Moving on to gameplay and positioning, this will be covered in more detail during the class-specific videos, however there are some basic principles which can be followed for all classes. Firstly, Purge. The aim of Purge is to remove dangerous debuffs on the raid before they become a problem. Purge can only hit 6 people at a time, however it also applies a 4-second buff, which reduces the duration of additional debuffs on you. This buff is as important to maintain across your raid as removing the debuffs themselves is. It's the reason why one Purger for more than 12 people isn't really effective, as you would have to cast more than 2 Purges to maintain the buff across everyone. This is also in between all your other skills such as self-buffs, defensive abilities, and then any other role-specific abilities, for example Orbs when the group needs Sustain, or control abilities such as Streak and Talons. As well as this, you also need to make decisions about your positioning, raid movements based on the enemies that you're facing, and also following the leadership calls. It's not as simple as just spamming one button forever. You have a lot of other things to do in the meantime. There are situations where if you're in a particularly dangerous spot, for example under oils, or in a choke point where you can be hit by many negative debuffs, this might be a time where you do need to spam more than 2 or 3 purges in a row, but these situations are very specific and they do not occur all the time. There are many situations where you don't accrue much debuffs, and therefore you don't need to waste your Magicka on always purging, and you can use these times to buff up, use other abilities that will help the raid, and also just conserve your Magicka for the times where it is needed. Speaking specifically about Orbs have a 20-second cooldown per person, so obviously depending on your raid size, this will dictate how often Orbs need to be used. You want to be using Orbs as often as possible, and generally how a raid will do this is to assign the role specifically to someone. So there might be one dedicated Purger, one dedicated Orber, and the one hybrid. Purge is obviously required more often than Orb. This is due to needing to easily break free of time stops, remove the debuffs as mentioned, but also Orbs, due to its cooldown, will have periods where it's needed in mass and then not at all. This leaves you free to use other abilities such as Streak or Talons or Healing Ward. Things like this which will help your raid can be timed and need to be used effectively, but then allow you to swap back into Orb when it's needed. Thanks everyone for listening. As I said, we'll be releasing more guides periodically. If you do have any questions, feel free to contact us in-game or down below.